Two of the most important aspects of any great fire attack is the size up and the 360.
Battalion 147, Medic Truck 304, Medic Engine 22, Medic Engine 311, Medic Engine 313, residential structure fire, report of smoke and flame scene.
Sir, Medic Engine 311 is on scene, single story, single family dwelling. Heavy smoke and fire showing from the alpha side. We do have an immediate exposure to the occupancy to the delta side. Medic Engine 311 will be in the attack mode, switching attack. I'm only going to switch over monitor for 360.
So this video comes from the San Bernardino County Firefighters channel. They are one of the best out there, so I will put a link to the full video in the description below. Be sure you go and check them out. But originally, they were dispatched to a residential structure fire with possible occupants. And I wanted to highlight some of the things that they did when they first arrived on scene. This video was a great example of a good size up and a good 360, and both of those are important for a great fire attack. Now you might be asking, what is the difference between a size up and a 360? And they're very similar in many ways, but essentially a size up just gives you a street view of what's going on. As soon as you pull up on scene, this is your report to everybody else, including dispatch, what you see and what you think you're going to be doing going forward. A 360 is a more comprehensive view of the entire fire scene. The officer or whoever's in the front seat gets out and literally walks around the entire structure to look for any sort of possible issues or anything else that might change your original strategy of attacking the fire. Both of these elements are important. We'll go into 360s here in a minute, but right now I wanted to talk about his size up and what he did well. The first thing you notice is that there was no panicking, there was no yelling. He was very clear and concise what he said, so every incoming unit knew exactly what to expect when they showed up and exactly what that first unit, his unit, was planning on doing. But there was also some information in his size up that if you are a new or young firefighter and you find yourself doing this in the future, you should include in any size up. And the first thing was the type of structure. You heard him say single story, single family dwelling. That's important for everybody to know, making sure this is not a multifamily residence or any other type of residence. Next thing he said is what he sees. He said heavy smoke and fire showing from the alpha side. This gives everybody a good idea of what they're walking into. Is this just some light, lazy smoke, or is there flames pouring out of the window? That's important to relay to everybody, and he did that clearly and concisely and said exactly what area of the house the fire was coming from. The next thing he mentioned was there any exposures? And he said immediate exposure on the occupancy on the delta side. If there is a structure fire that is out of control and you're going to be going defensive, one of the first things you should be thinking about doing is making sure that you can protect any sort of exposure so that that fire does not spread from that residence to somebody else's residence. You see in this video, you see these houses are pretty tight. So even in a situation like this where it hasn't spread, there will probably be damage. And you'll see a little bit later, looks like the neighbor is standing outside spraying the fire with his garden hose. He's doing the best he can to probably put out the fire, but also protect his stuff as well. So it's important to let other incoming units know if there's any exposures and where they are. And then finally, he said exactly what he was going to do. He said, Medic Engine 311 in attack mode, have all units monitor for 360. So he's telling all the incoming units, we're going to begin our attack. Make sure you listen up. I'm going to get out and walk around and let you know if I see anything else.
Hey, you got any info? Okay.
Comm Center, Medic Engine 313 is on scene. I'll be assuming 5th Street IC. ICP will be located at Medic Engine 313.
Medic Engine 313, I copy on scene, assuming 5th Street ICP to be your vehicle.
All units responding to 5th Avenue, B Street structure fire. 360 complete. We got heavy smoke and fire from the alpha side. Direct exposure on delta. Unknown on occupancies, whether it's evacuated or not. No life hazard present. Offensive strategy will be assuming fire attack. We'll be transitional until we get standby in place. Medic Engine 311 has a water supply. Battalion 147 copies your 360 and assuming fire attack.
Now, this guy did a lot of things right, and I wanted to point out some of them. The first thing that he did is he asked the sheriff's deputy, and it looked like some other people, some civilians or neighbors standing outside, do you have any info? A lot of times that's going to be your best source of information, is people that are either occupants that got out or neighbors knowing exactly what goes on in that house. So be sure, if you find yourself getting ready to do a 360 and you see a neighbor, ask them, hey, do you know anything? How many people live here? Is everybody out? The next thing he did is he actually did a 360. You see this too many times where somebody will get out to do a 360 and they kind of poke their head around one side and then the other and call that a 360. Now, if you're dealing with a massive commercial fire that takes up several blocks, obviously it's not going to be realistic to do an entire 360, but a small residential fire like this, you should absolutely be walking around the entire structure. So what did he relay in his 360? Well, he relayed some of the information he did in his scene size up, which was heavy smoke and fire from the A side and a direct exposure on the D side. It's important to relay that again because that tells all the other incoming units that that actually is the case. We're going to need to protect the exposure on the D side, and we're also going to need to begin our fire attack on the Alpha side. You heard him also mention that there was unknown occupancy. That is one of the most important aspects and reasons why you do a 360. When you do your scene size up and you first show up, you might not see any victims or anybody hanging out the back, but if you walk around to the back of the house and you see a victim hanging out of a second-story window yelling for help, that changes your priorities. That will now become your number one priority, to get and rescue that person. Next, he said no life hazards. That's an important thing to look for when you're walking around a house. Are there any down power lines? Looks like this is probably an older neighborhood. Looks like the power lines are still above ground. That's important to know because you don't want a firefighter walking back there and accidentally stepping on a live power line. And finally, he laid out exactly what his plan of attack was going to be. He said it was going to be offensive and transitional. If you're not sure what transitional is, that means you're just going to hit the fire from the outside before you go in to fight the fire from the inside. It's kind of common sense, but that's a common term that you'll hear. But also he said that they have a water supply secured. That's important to let other incoming units know that they're not going to need to get a water supply. Now, that doesn't mean that you aren't aware of where to get a second water supply, but for something like this, looks like there's a hydrant right out front. They could easily just go operate off of that, and that should be all the water they need for this particular scene. And in my opinion, this guy did a great job. His instructions were clear and concise. He let his crew and all the incoming units know exactly what they were going to be showing up on and what he wanted them to do when they got there.